6.1, completing the square. Now this is actually part one. The first two lessons, 6.1 and 6.2, are all about completing the square. This is going to be like a little intro. This is what I mean by completing a square. Basically, if you use tiles to create these polynomials all together, you can come up with a square shape where the length and the width are the same. So it's a square. It makes a perfect square. So to complete the square, it needs to follow this format where the number of your polynomials would match up to make a square. So like if this was an 8, this could not be a complete square. It'd be missing a tile. Or if this was 5x, I couldn't make it a perfect square. So it has to be written a certain way for it to work. Now, once you write it as a perfect square, you can write the lengths. X plus 3 is the length, x plus 3 is the width, and when you put that together, you get x plus 3 squared. So the idea is when you write it as a perfect square, this is your factored form. And you can solve for x in this case. All right, now, what most of the problems are going to ask you to do is to find a value for c that will make it a perfect square. So just imagine you start with this, x squared plus 8x. This is what the tiles look like. You have 8 x's and you have 1x squared. You would want to split this in half. You want to split it in half so that when you try to make your perfect square, you have the same length and width. But then you need to figure out, okay, how many single pieces do I need? Well, if you have 4 going this way and 4 going this way, you would have 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. So the number you need here at the end for c would be 16. So you'd have x squared plus 8x plus 16. That is your perfect square. And then if you wrote this as in factored form, x, 1, 2, 3, 4, you get x plus 4 squared. Sorry, it looks kind of like a 9. I don't know what I was doing there. But yeah, you get x plus 4 and x plus 4 as your length and width. So the first problems are having you figure out what value do you need down here for c. So right here, without drawing it, you still need to take the number and cut it in half. And the number I'm talking about is this one. You need to take the b term. Take the b and cut it in half, split it in half. You get negative 8. Then you take that number and you square it. Negative 8 times negative 8, 64. So this expression as a perfect square should be x squared minus 16x plus 64. This is what the perfect square would be. If you write it in your factored form, it'd be x minus 8 squared. That's what the perfect square would be here. Okay, so that's how you do it without the drawing. Take the middle term, take the b, split it in half. That gives you 5. Take that number and square it. That is your c. So this would be x squared plus 10x plus 25. That's the perfect square. Then when you write it in your factored form, it would be x plus 5 squared. Okay, and that's basically it. That's how you find the value for c. Okay. Now, if you're going to solve an equation by completing the square, the c that you need is not there. Like this number is not going to help you solve it. So what you do is you get rid of this. We move it to the other side. So now you have x squared plus 6x, nothing over here, equals 16. Now I left a space here because you need a new c. You need a new number to make a perfect square. All right? So we do what I just did earlier. You need to find a new value for c. So you take your b term, take the b, split it in half. In this case, take 6 divided by 2, you get 3. take 3 and you square it, you get 9. So you are adding 9 to make this a perfect square. There's a rule though. If you're adding 9 to the left side of the equation, you are also adding 9 to the right side of the equation. So now this problem, x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 25. That's your new problem. Okay, now we're not going to leave this written like standard form. We're not going to leave it like this. We're going to write it in factored form. X plus 3 squared equals 25. And this is what we want because this we can solve. So we're going to solve this. We're going to solve for x. We're going to start by getting rid of the power of 2. How do you get rid of the power of 2? You take the square root. When you take the square root, you're left with x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 25, which is 5. Okay, next. We want to get rid of that 3. Remember, we're solving for x. So we're going to do inverse operations to both sides. So you get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 5. Wait a minute. What does that plus or minus 5 mean? That means you're going to do two things. You're going to do one answer where you're adding 5, and then you're going to do another answer where you're subtracting 5. So the first answer, what happens if it's negative 3 plus 5? Negative 3 plus 5 is positive 2. Okay, what if you're subtracting 5? What would be negative 3 minus 5? Well, that would be negative 8. So you have two answers for x. You have positive 2 and you have negative 8. Or another way you can write your answer, x equals negative 8 and 2. And that's how you solve by completing the square. Okay, so completing the square is changing the value of c in the problem and then using the perfect square form and square roots to solve. All right, let's do a couple more because I know this is all brand new. And remember, rewatch this, play it at half speed. Here, the c is already moved, so you don't have to worry about that. What we have to do is take the middle term, split it in half. So take negative 18, split it in half, we get negative 9. Okay, take negative 9 and square it. Negative 9 times negative 9 is 81. So we are going to, sorry about that, some random number calling me right now. We are going to take 81 as our c, and we're going to add it to this side as our perfect square. But if I'm adding 81 here, I also have to add 81 there. So we're not going to leave it like this. We're going to change this to be as a perfect square, which would be x minus 9 squared. Now, if you're asking where I get the minus 9, it's when you split it in half. The way you split it in half is how you get the length and the width number. So that number is in your factored form. On the other side, 81 minus 15, I get 76. I get 66. Okay. Now we're going to solve this. We're going to take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 66. Now I need to try to factor this. 2 times 33, yeah, that's not going to work. 4, nope, that's not going to work. 6 times 11, no, none of those numbers have square roots, so I'm going to leave it like this. I'm going to leave it as plus or minus 66. Now, don't use a calculator right now, just leave it as square root of 66. Inverse operations, we're going to move the 9 over. My answer for x is 9 plus or minus the square root of 66. Yeah, guys, if you can't take the square root, you can leave your answer as a square root. That is a totally acceptable answer. That is fine. Don't have to change that. Okay. Now, sometimes when you're solving these, they're not written in the best way. Like this is totally mixed around. What's important is that you have your x squared as a positive number, and this number with the x, the 10x, should be with the x squared. The 3 can stay over there. That's fine. But we should move the 10x. Inverse operations. Let's move that 10x over. Now we have this, x squared minus 10x equals 3, and that's better. Okay, now this is our b. So we're going to split that in half. We get -5. All right, then we're going to take that -5, we're going to square it. We get 25. So now this problem, x squared minus 10x, and I'm going to add 25 to it. I'm adding 25. Okay, and if you add 25 to that side, you're also going to add 25 to this side. All right, now this will be x minus 5 squared. Remember where I got the number from that? Good. Here, this is 28. All right, we're going to take the square root of both sides. This is going to be x minus 5. This can be factored. 4 times 7, and 4 has a square root, plus or minus 2 square root of 7. Because the 4 has a square root, you can take that out. Okay, going to move the 5. The inverse of minus 5 is plus 5 to both sides. My answer is going to be x equals 5 plus or minus 2 radical 7. And that's it. That's my answer. And guys, that is solving using perfect squares.